Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a massive coastal dilemma facing India, and honestly, a lot of other developing nations. When the sea rises, do we build massive walls or do we just pack up and move? I mean, with over 7,500 kilometers of coastline and millions of people living right in those low-lying areas, India is facing an incredibly tough choice. Now, the gut instinct for a lot of folks is to just pour more concrete, right? To engineer our way out of the problem and literally hold the line against the ocean. But as we're going to see when we dig into the reality of these projects, that instinct might actually be a pretty dangerous trap. Okay, let's quickly run through our roadmap for today. We'll start with the concrete illusion, then move into understanding the maladaptation trap, look at what managed retreat actually is, explore the human cost in India, lay out 3 steps to fair adaptation, and finally talk about moving to higher ground. All right, let's dive right into section 1, the concrete illusion. Now, you might be wondering, why do we build these massive walls in the first place? Well, to really understand India's dilemma, we have to look at the broader picture. Developing countries actually have a very strong case for using heavy engineering and fossil fuels to buy time for their economic growth. They absolutely deserve an extended off-ramp so they don't plunge millions of people right back into poverty. So using engineering to buy time is basically a developmental right. But the big question we have to ask ourselves is, at what ultimate cost? Which brings us directly to section 2, understanding the maladaptation trap. So what exactly is maladaptation? Well, basically, it's a cure that is way worse than the disease. It's when our efforts to adapt to climate change actually backfire. The trap usually springs around social equity. Think about it. When a government uses heavy engineering to build luxury coastal roads or high-end reclaimed cities, they're essentially buying time for people to walk right into a trap. If this engineering just diverts more investment into high-risk zones, it doesn't solve the problem at all. It just supercharges the catastrophe that's inevitably coming as global warming continues. To put that into perspective, take a look at Nigeria and their Great Wall of Lagos. The perceived benefit seems pretty clear at first glance. It protects high-end real estate and this shiny, brand-new financial district from the Atlantic Ocean. But there is a massive, often ignored, hidden cost. This giant wall actually diverts all that destructive tidal energy straight into neighboring lower-income areas like Alpha Beach. So in trying to protect the wealthy, the state literally accelerated erosion for the poorer districts. And we see this kind of failure all over the globe. It's like a giant puzzle where forcing one piece into place shatters another. In Vietnam, authorities built this vast system of high dikes to protect their rice-producing areas. But those dikes stopped the river from depositing natural sediment, which actually caused the Mekong Delta to sink even faster than the sea is rising. Closer to home in India, look at the Kosi River. Embankments were built decades ago. But because the river is so confined, the silt that would normally naturally spread across the plains just settles right on the riverbed. Over time, the water level actually rises meters above the surrounding land. So when the monsoon rains eventually cause those embankments to breach, it results in absolutely catastrophic flooding. So if we can't always just build bigger walls, what's the alternative? That brings us to section 3. What is managed retreat? The UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change defines managed retreat as the purposeful, coordinated relocation of people and infrastructure away from hazards. It's often called planned relocation. At its core, it's just the realistic acknowledgement that sometimes you simply cannot fight the water. You have to move. Now, wealthier nations in the global north are actively experimenting with this right now. They're using significant capital to fund buyouts. In the US, they use hazard mitigation grants to actually purchase flood-prone homes and turn that land back into open space. The UK is doing something wild. They are intentionally breaching their own seawalls to create natural salt marshes that act as buffers. And New Zealand is red zoning specific areas to keep developers completely out of high-risk zones. But here's the catch. Even with all that money, this often sparks massive legal battles over property rights. And it can really sustain class gaps where wealthy enclaves just fortify themselves while marginalized communities are the ones told to pack up and leave. But what does this actually look like on the ground? Let's move to section 4, the human cost in India. Just take a look at this image. This is a rehabilitation colony in Bagapatia. What's incredibly interesting and honestly heartbreaking is that back in 2018, the Odisha government had to move over 500 families from a cluster of villages called Satabaya because the Bay of Bengal had almost entirely swallowed their homes, directly to this exact settlement. The state did provide housing, which is great, for physical safety. But physical safety isn't the whole story, is it? These families lost something completely irreplaceable.
Almost overnight, people went from being the proud owners of their ancestral farming lands to having to hustle as daily wage laborers in a completely new market, a market where they had absolutely no relevant skills. This is the real human cost when retreat is just about moving bodies to a new location rather than actually sustaining people's lives and livelihoods.
And sadly, this profound loss of livelihood and culture is mirrored globally. Just in 2024, the Panamanian government officially relocated the Guna indigenous community from a sinking island onto the mainland. Sure, economically and logistically, the move was managed, but the Guna people's entire identity is completely tied to the sea. Their new homes on the mainland lack that deep ancestral connection, and it totally cut off the traditional fishing access that had sustained them for centuries. They are now facing a massive cultural crisis. It just goes to show that bad adaptation doesn't just lose money, it strips entire communities of their identity. So, how do we fix this? Let's move into Section 5. 3 steps to fair adaptation. To avoid impoverishing these vulnerable communities, we need a massive paradigm shift. Here is a 3-step blueprint for a much more equitable future. Developing receiver cities, formally recognizing informal settlements, and implementing soft defenses. Let's break these down. I absolutely love this quote from our source material because it hits the nail right on the head. There is a third choice hidden between concrete walls and panicked flight. A hybrid strategy that marries law, policy, and engineering. We literally do not have to choose between just drowning under the rising tides or facing chaotic, panicked displacement. Okay, step 1. We have to fundamentally change how we view the people who are relocating. Taking inspiration from the port of Mongla in Bangladesh, India needs to start investing in creating receiver cities in its inland areas right now. By proactively investing in new schools, factories, and raised infrastructure, the government can make voluntary relocation an economically attractive choice. We need to start treating displaced people as pioneers of a brand new geography, rather than helpless climate refugees. Step 2 addresses a massive legal hurdle. We absolutely have to reform coastal land laws to formally grant legal titles to informal settlements. Right now, when the state treats folks displaced by climate change as mere encroachers, it basically criminalizes their survival. State-supported relocation requires a really solid foundation of legal recognition so that these vulnerable populations have actual leverage, rights, and dignity during the transition. And that brings us to our final section. Moving to higher ground. For this final step, we really have to change how we physically interact with the ocean. Trying to keep the water out entirely with massive concrete walls is just a false permanence. It's not sustainable. Instead, India needs to transition to nature-based soft defenses. Think about China's incredibly successful sponge cities like Ningbo and Shanghai. They're using permeable pavements, restoring wetlands, and relying on things like mangroves, bioswales, and artificial reefs. These natural solutions absorb the water and help us adapt to the ocean's rhythms, rather than futilely trying to fight them. Now, we do have to be realistic. Sometimes a government might decide that hard engineering is absolutely 100% necessary, like if they need to protect a critical financial hub such as Mumbai. But if we're going to build a massive wall, there must be fail-safe mechanisms built into the plan. That means establishing wide buffer zones around seawalls and deliberately creating sacrificial floodplains. We have to ensure that when the water inevitably spills over, and it will, marginalized communities are not just left as collateral damage. Ultimately, India cannot just surrender its incredibly vast coast to the sea. But at the same time, it absolutely cannot use that as an excuse to lie to itself about the permanence of concrete. We have to abandon this illusion that we can just engineer our way out of everything. Instead, it is time to do the hard work, laying the legal and economic foundations for a dignified, planned, and equitable move to higher ground. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final, absolutely crucial thought. Will we retreat with panic, or will we move forward as pioneers? Because the water is rising. That's just a scientific fact. But how we manage this massive transition, whether we blindly keep pouring concrete until it cracks and fails, or we thoughtfully build up receiver cities and soft defenses, that choice is going to define our entire future. Thanks so much for joining me today to explore this, and I really encourage you to look around and start questioning how your own communities are preparing for the tides of tomorrow. See you next time.